the purpose. Essentially, there were 3 phases to our work. The first phase was to do some kind of data mining and fact-finding, and that involved looking at your internal documents, your mission, your vision statement. We needed to build a strong understanding of who you are as an organization in order to test that against the community. We needed to understand what your mission, what was driving you on a daily basis in order to do what you do. And we worked closely with HART staff members and leadership in order to develop kind of those tenets that you're trying to achieve day in and day out so that we, again, could test those against the community. Again, mission and vision statement. The phase 2 was when we jumped into our stakeholder. We could have immediately fielded a community-wide survey. Our practice is typically to begin with stakeholder interviews because it informs us to a degree that exceeds what we would be just jumping into a survey from the beginning. So essentially we identified stakeholders throughout the community who
Yeah, just to FYI, the presentation I think is not queued up just yet. There we go. Sorry about that.
There it is.
Sorry. Okay.
Now you're seeing what I'm seeing.
All right. Thank you.
So the phase 2 was really intended to give us that depth of knowledge. We reached out to individuals that were involved in community planning and transportation in some way, either through an elected position, an appointed position, or some sort of volunteer commitment through a board association. And we interviewed 38 different stakeholders throughout May and June of this year. We asked them about their top-of-mind associations, their expectations for the organization, any limiting factors, requests, and this is what we used then in order to develop the questions that we took that were multiple choice form. It's very, very difficult to take an all open-ended survey to the community. No one wants to participate in that. It's too taxing. So the feedback that we got from the stakeholders helps to inform then what the questions became that we took to the community. Just not to spend a whole lot of time on the stakeholder piece, but I did want to share the highlight feedback. Starting on the left-hand side, these were the most common sentiments that we heard echoed from the stakeholders. And there is no magic number of interviews, just FYI. When you hit the 20-25 number, you typically start to hear the same things over and over again. So when we had talked about this originally, we said, you know, we'll do between 20 and 40 interviews. And so we ended up with 38. Those are the individuals that opted in, and we wanted to definitely hear from. We didn't want to cut off at just 25 interviews. So essentially the common stakeholder findings, there's a limited view of HART beyond bus, and I think that you had a sense of that going into this. The stakeholders have a lack of experience. This is something that we didn't have a gauge for going into the process, but we found that of the 38, 28 of the stakeholders had never engaged with a HART service. 3 were routine, and 7 had tried on a trial basis in order to see what it was like using HART services. So that's the frame of reference that we're getting when we talk about the stakeholders. The stakeholders have limited knowledge. Again, that ties back to limited use. And the big challenge there that kind of was a big exclamation point to us is your stakeholders cannot be out there singing your praises and talking about all of the great and wonderful things that HART is doing if they don't have that baseline awareness of all of the services that you provide. The second column, the stakeholders would like to see greater leadership visibility, and that was requested in the form of chamber presentations, leadership group presentations, Rotary clubs, that kind of thing. Any opportunity to get out and, again, beat the drum of what HART is doing. There are great things that are happening within this organization, and it's a challenge, I know, to step back and realize what needs to be shared to the community, but that is a very important piece of all of this. Greater community involvement, a lack of broad appreciation for the urgent needs. So all of our stakeholders were willing participants. They wanted to be a part of this study, but they did have a kind of an undertone of frustration that we keep talking about this. Something needs to happen, and it needs to happen. So there's this sentiment of kind of kicking the can down the road and talking about we need to do something, but something has to happen. In the far right column, the stakeholders shared a lack of clarity with the organization's intended purpose, in that it's really, it comes down to the scope of service. So is the entire community to be served by HART, or is this for the transportation limited? That's where the major confusion lies. Middle right, stakeholders want to see the data that drives decisions. They shared that it is much easier to make the case if they have more data. So for a funding request, they need to know how many additional jobs could be connected, what is the economic impact of the organization overall, but especially when there's a change to a route, what are the actual data points that will connect understanding community-wide of this makes perfect sense to do this. It's critical to do this because of X, Y, and Z. And then leadership by example was the final comment. And that really came down to they want staff, they want board members, they want committee members, they want to see everyone riding HART and using HART and talking about their stories, because if they can connect their own experience to someone else and they can see, I can do this too, this is for me, it's for everybody, that has a lot of value in changing what we heard a lot which was it's not a part of our culture here, to engage in public transportation. It's not like in other cities. The stakeholders gave great anecdotes, and a lot of all of the comments that we received from the stakeholders, just so you know, are in the full report. So there's an appendix section that's very lengthy, so if you'd like some light reading, you have some information that you can go through to see their full comments. But we tried to pare down in the actual section of the report the most critical points. So that was the setting up our understanding of what the stakeholders had to say and what we might want to test or measure within the community at large. So that moved us into phase 3, which was the community survey in July. 469 respondents. It was an online survey, 8 minutes on average, which is exactly where you want to be. You want to be under 10 minutes for an online survey. 4.9 margin of error. You want to be below 5%, so we were in good shape there. And we had good representation. We monitored our response from different areas of the county to make sure we weren't just getting city respondents. We weren't just getting Temple Terrace or Plant City. We were getting respondents from everywhere. So it truly was representative of Ozark County. One of the first questions that we asked within the survey was, what is your top of mind perception of the organization? And this was completely open-ended. There was not any prompt. And again, it was early in the survey, so they didn't have a lot of information at that point. But bus service and transit service, the positive here is that there is strong alignment between what the organization does and the perception of the organization. The weakness is in the specific services. So you didn't have a lot of your individual programs named. It was more or less bus service. There was a share of respondents that said nothing, so you have that within the community as a challenge for brand awareness, but by and large, your awareness was at a high level throughout the community for what you are in place to do in general transportation. Information sources. This is helpful in what you do with the information piece. So we wanted to capture what are the most impactful sources of information for the community. And how did they learn what they currently know about HART? What are the sources? Word of mouth and personal experience were the number 1 and 2. So this is where it's very critical for the awareness of the different services and the scope of the organization to be high, because without that, your word of mouth is much more minimal than what it really could be. Experiences shared by peers. And then the 33% and the 28% web or news articles and social media. Those are 2 mediums where you have a lot of control over that. You have pretty much 90% of the control over that. So that's your directed content. You can be generating press releases that you push out to the wires. You don't have to necessarily wait for one of the local media outlets to cover you. You can create your own content, and then it's republished by others through the PR mediums. So that's very helpful to know that those are mediums within your control and that they are impactful to the community at large. Typical user perceptions. This was another open-ended question, and it was very telling, reverting back to what we discussed about public transportation not being a part of our culture. This is where it comes to play. The typical user perceptions, by and large, the respondents are not seeing themselves in the typical user perceptions. So So that's limiting them from saying, I can be one of the routine riders because I identify with the individuals. They're calling them out as working class, impoverished, basically enlarged non-choice riders. So at the current time, that is your baseline of perception when you ask the public here. It's interesting when you look at the secondary studies that the typical user doesn't vary too much demographically from the general population when you do national studies of public transportation users. We're in a different element here that we have not ingrained it in our culture, so this is one of the challenges that's in the way of HART. Catering to populations. We asked on a 7-point scale how well HART caters to different populations. And you have different services that you offer that cater to these different groups. So it's helpful to know how the public at large is kind of grading you in some ways on this. Residents without a personal vehicle were perceived as bester. The visitors and tourists, only 57% felt on a 7-point scale that you were serving them on a 5 to 7, 5, 6, or 7. So this is the high end of the scale.
Excuse me. So just to clarify, those percentages are percentages of a 7-point scale?
Yes. So okay. This is rated a 5, 6, or 7 on the 7-point scale. The positive. HART fulfilling expectations. As I mentioned, we sat down with HART staff and we developed a list of tactics and goals that the organization wanted to be known for, wanted to be providing to the public. We asked the respondents if they considered those to be valid things for a transit organization to work towards, and by and large, they were right on point with exactly what the public felt the organization should be doing. So directionally, we're on a great path. We followed that up by asking how well is the organization fulfilling those. So we established that they're important to the public. Now, how well is HART fulfilling those specific topics? The strongest fulfillment, we're providing reliable public transportation, connecting people and places, catering to those without vehicle access, affordable transportation options, and getting riders to destinations in a timely manner. The areas where there's a weaker perception of fulfillment, safe places to wait, good stewards of public dollars, reasonable wait times, catering to the needs of the whole community, and offering a variety of modes. So if you wanted to kind of triage from a communication standpoint those perceptions that are strongest versus weakest, this is the way to go about that. Service familiarity. We asked just a simple yes or no, are you aware of these different HART services? So this is the percentage shown are those unaware of the HART services. And up at the top you see Flamingo Fares, Travel Training Program, and One Bus Away. The high level of lack of awareness with regard to those specific topics is going to challenge your perception as being an innovative and a tech-driven organization, because there is a lack of connecting from a community standpoint your organization with offering these things. The travel training program, again, the low level of awareness of that is going to challenge back to your word of mouth opportunity of spreading the word of what HART's doing. And you can see the breakdown. Obviously, the lowest unaware rating was for HART bus service. Interest in new. We asked the respondents to share how likely they would be to use new services. So the new services were major stadium, ballpark, or event shuttle, airport service, service to Pinellas County beaches, connector to other transit options, and commuter service. So you can see those are the percentage that shared that they were likely to take advantage if they were available or more available. And then how strongly do you associate HART with the following? This was a 7-point scale, and what's shown on the far right-hand side is the average rating. So these were additional attributes that HART would like to be known as providing throughout the community. So at the most basic level, transportation provider, that was your highest association between the community and the organization. Economical alternative was number 2, and parking alleviator was number 3. Down at the bottom, again, a reflection of the lower level of awareness of services that relate to those topics, source of innovative transportation solutions, integrator of new technology into its services, and resource for crowd control during events. So those innovation and tech options are likely to increase as the awareness of the products and service lines that correlate to those increases. Looking ahead, the big challenge is the lack of association throughout the community between HART and non-bus services. 33% do not have knowledge of HART funding. They, if asked, is it too much, is it too little, they're just not sure how to answer. 35% believe that the organization is underfunded, and 69% agree that HART delivers value to Hillsborough County. 87% believe HART can provide the transportation solutions for the future. So that's a good amount of optimism that you're seeing. They're challenged when it comes to funding. There's not solid understanding there, which is expected. It's not a responsibility of the community per se to have explicit knowledge of that. But the agreeing that HART is providing value and really seeing that expand in the future, you're seeing some optimism come out in those numbers. And then the overarching observations, just to summarize, their strong identification of HART as a transportation system. It's not like you have a brand equity or a brand awareness challenge on your hand overall as what the organization is to do. The association beyond the bus service, however, is weak. There are low levels of program service knowledge to recognize community-wide the robust nature of what you do provide. Widespread potential user confusion. This was something that we didn't get into. This came back from the stakeholder responses, actually. There's a fear by the stakeholders that have never used HART. They don't know how to start. They don't understand the routes. They don't understand the maps. And there's this, for lack of a better way to say it, they don't want to feel stupid and not know and not understand how to use it. That's a big thing to overcome. And there's a travel training program, something that's easy to overcome. So, issue solution. There's a perception of HART as solely non-choice, and that comes out in the open-ended responses that we looked at. The leaders are not engaged with the services, so looking at the stakeholders that we talked to is a snapshot of the Hillsborough County as a whole. By and large, they were not participating. Community outreach can be stronger. It's considered by the stakeholders as weak now, but study data can become your baseline for the future. So this can come into play in your scorecard, your community scorecard. This can come into play in your community outreach activities, but now you have a baseline of where you started to see in the future years.
Wow.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Good job. And are there any questions regarding the presentation? Ms. Williams?
Hi, thank you for the overview. It was a great foundation for us to build our plans moving forward. Just have a few questions in regards to the baseline information. What qualified someone as a stakeholder?
Stakeholder, we looked at a list of different organizations county-wide. We really were not selective in the process, but any transportation related, I believe that there's a list of the stakeholders in the appendix if you're interested in seeing.
I tried to look for them.
But we reached out to any transit related or transit adjacent even organization and wanted to talk to their board chair, their CEO, anyone in even a community related liaison position so that we could understand how they were interacting and engaging with HART and how that could be improved, or if it was just great as it was. That we didn't have a short list or anything that we were going from. We tried to be as wide reaching as possible.
Thank you. One other question in regards to the page, let's say 6, 9, where the facts are dated. There's different color code noted. There's different color coding. What does that represent to me?
There isn't an association. It was just to have a different color. The
Okay.
frequency. So from left to right, most frequent to least frequent mentioned. But as far as it representing a specific number or a specific theme. There's not a...
Okay, I was wondering dark blue, light blue, green. I was thinking maybe the green or, okay, thank you.
Yeah. First, thank you for the brief. Just a statement, I think this is a shot across the bow that we need to kind of step up our media game, if you will, and I think this is something we've addressed in the past. I too was going to ask you the question about the color coding. With that in mind now, and understanding that was just for aesthetics, if you look at slide 8, I'm hoping that the numbers or the sizes of those letters was determined by the number of responses, and it was just not picked. Okay, then with that in mind, was I'll just ask the question straight out, was the pattern you put them on a slide dictated in a certain way? Or was it just selected and placed on that slide? Or was it computer generated?
As far as the order of the different slides, this top of mind question was one of the first, if not the first question in the survey. The order of the other slides was not necessarily identical to the way it was asked within the survey. Just as we found the findings from the study, it made sense to group certain things together in order.
The only reason I ask is that if you look at slide 8 and then you look at slide 10, the very first comment on both of them was negative.
Yeah, I think you were, to clarify, I think you were speaking of the actual words in the word cloud.
On the slide.
The words on the slide is automatically generated. So the only telling factor there is the size of the font. So the larger the font, the more frequently it was mentioned, smaller the font opposite.
Okay. All right, thank you.
All right. Are there any other questions?
I just have one more question, please.
Yes, you're recognized.
In regards to the feedback, I have not read the entire study. I plan to review it. Does it represent the numbers that are listed here, the percentages? Are we able to determine where or the segmentation? So when we put a plan together, we understand what we're targeting, and it may be different for different communities or areas, but may fall under the same percentage that you have listed here.
We have a separation of 3 different areas within Hillsborough County that we segmented the responses into. So yes, those can be looked at independently from one another. Your base obviously decreases in size, so you don't have the full 469 respondents per region. But the size of the respondents per region correlated with the proportional size of the population within that. So to answer your question, yes, the responses to Section A could be pulled out and looked at independently from B and C.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you, Chief.
Yeah. Mr. Knight, you're recognized.
And again, thanks for the presentation, and I will myself look through a lot of that. But I think like some of the negatives, that could be worked on. The good thing about it that I feel, Mr. Sewer, Ms. Lee, and some of the other staff that have been talking on some of these things, such as the safety of the stops and different things, street lighting. In fact, we got a meeting coming up on that. Some of these things, I guess the better they are, the people are aware of what's going on, can help. But I think we're right on mark on some of the things that concerns, some of these concerns that's already been worked on. So thanks for that.
Thank you, Mr. Knight.
Okay.
All right. If there aren't any other questions, I had just a couple of comments and questions. And thanks again for the great presentation. Yeah, I would echo some of the sentiments. I think this is a great insight. Without digging into too many of the numbers, I think that there are some that each of us probably have our hot points that we'd like to kind of keep continuing to analyze moving forward. And I think we should all, including the rest of the board, definitely look at the full study, or at least have access to it. So, Jeff, if you could coordinate us getting a PDF copy, not paper, we don't need paper unless somebody requests it, but a PDF access. One thing I'll say is, again, and I speak as someone who's been on the board for relatively quite some time now, about 6 years. There is a message here, or there is a lesson that has continued throughout my service, and that is HART being more proactive and kind of occupying that space as opposed to others defining it for us. And I think, I will tell you right now, I'm very convicted right now in really, in each of us, kind of picking whatever our hot button is, but definitely talking, at the next board meeting about how we as an organization and staff as partners can change the way we approach communications. Because you hit on one of the key things, social media. That's the one place where we can define things ourselves. And if we're not taking advantage of that, and without expressing an opinion on that, I'll just say, I really think there's a tremendous opportunity to address that, to address the message that we put out. And I'll just give you one example. And with all due respect, you commented that the public's they don't necessarily have a responsibility to understand the fact that we might be underfunded. As stewards of the public trust and the public dollar, I think it's incumbent upon us to help them understand, what the funding situation is and how we spend their money. So I think that topic right there, in some kind of low-cost messaging to help, just like how we have a travel trainer program, an online virtual training and just transparency, if you will, kind of, it could be explainer videos, it could be some graphics, something that doesn't necessarily, and I know that we've spent quite a bit of money, we have on going out and doing outreach. I think this is really again, it just convicts me in efficiency and how we approach this, and I think we have a tremendous opportunity, and I'll leave it there. So thank you. Appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Next on the agenda, we have the committee action items. First is item A, and I believe we have Mr. Smith. You're on deck.
Good morning. Thank you very much. There's a lot of material that you have in your backup, so what I'd like to do is point out a couple of issues that I want to bring to your attention, because I don't want you to be surprised at the board meeting or elsewhere and say, why didn't you point that out to me? So if I can, if you turn to that tab, it's tab A in your materials, and the first one is page 6. It's 120.02. And this deals with your board of directors, and it is tied to the statute. The statute specifically says that each of the constituent members will appoint one representative for the first 100,000 of population. There's been some views expressed that the appointed person must be a member of that particular jurisdiction. The statute does not say that, meaning, for example, the Hillsborough County is not limited to appointing people solely from unincorporated Hillsborough County, because the calculation of representation is the county minus the population of the municipality. So it's unincorporated in terms of the number of directors and the vote that goes with that, but it doesn't tie it into a representative. For example, the city of Tampa could appoint someone who's not resident in the city of Tampa, and as currently as it has worked. In many cases, I know there's been times where Hillsborough County has appointed, well, most of them are their electeds, but they have appointed people who are resident in one of the municipalities. So I just wanted to clarify that, and that's what this does. But there's a choice that I need you to make. If you look at the heading that says term, it says all board members must be resident in. You don't have this requirement yet, but I believe it's maybe implied. All board members must be resident in, and I'm giving you two options, either Greater Hillsborough County, inclusive of all municipalities, not including Plant City, since they have not opted in, or a board member may be simply anybody in Hillsborough County. The statute talks about an eligible member. It doesn't define it. Your policy does not define it. This assumption is you want to at least define it in terms of someone resident in Hillsborough County. So my question to you is, do you want to just leave it at that level? Anybody within Hillsborough County could be appointed by any of the constituent governments that make up the regional authority, or do you want to leave out Plant City since they have not opted into the process? Or make that recommendation to the board. This is not final adoption, this is a review committee.
Oh, thank you for that clarification, Mr. Smith. So you're looking for our committee direction on that particular clarification, and I understand. Does anyone have any questions on what Mr. Smith just asked for clarification on?
I just want to clarify, we were on page 6. Is that
yes,
where I'm trying to catch up? Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I have a question also. When you say Plant City hasn't opted into the process,
They're not part of HART.
Yeah, they're not part of our system.
Yeah, the statute allows each of the local governments to participate in the Regional Transit Authority. Hillsborough County has, Temple Terrace has, and the city of Tampa has. The only one that has not is Plant City.
Mr. Smith, and you may, this isn't necessarily a question for you, but more of a general question. Has there been any change? Has anyone heard of any change with regard to Plant City? Is there any, movement otherwise? Because if I'm just bringing it up that if they were to, I don't know, if we were going to move in that direction, we would certainly not want to change this and exclude them. But
That would be one argument for making it just anybody who's resident in Hillsborough County can be an appointed member by any of the constituent members.
I'll offer this. Thank you, Mr. Smith. I'll offer this comment. I think, the Plant City's decision to not participate in our system, I know there's some history there. I don't think necessarily should it exclude us from having representation from, or should exclude one of the appointing bodies to exclude someone from Plant City, only because, I guess that could get sticky, but I'm thinking out loud here now, because if they're not served by us, then they would then have a voice and a voting voice. I don't know, I guess I would be inclined to not include them. Again, not that I don't want them included, but if you think about from a representation standpoint, if they have no interest whatsoever, then why would we want to have someone as a resident of that city? And that's a question. Mr. White, you're recognized.
Well, I'd like to see Plant City included, of course. Plant City's in my county commission district in East Hillsborough, and I wouldn't want someone that lives in Plant City that has a particular interest in transit from being excluded from participating on the board. Certainly our bus services would service communities near Plant City, communities like Dover, even unincorporated areas that have a Plant City address, but they're not part of the incorporated city. We have a lot of great community leaders out there. I have no known interest, coming out of the city of Plant City at this point, but certainly I wouldn't want that to be precluded looking forward if someone were to approach me and say, hey, I'd like to be more engaged in what's going on with our transit system in Hillsborough County, not even necessarily as it relates to the city of Plant City.
Okay. If I may just follow up on that comment. Yeah, I think, remembering that Plant City is still a part of Hillsborough County, and they're affected by us, right, even though we may not serve them. I think that, when you compare that to including someone outside Hillsborough County, clearly that's a totally different ballgame. But the fact that they're in the county, I think, is very, I agree with you. I think it's worth discussing. Ms. Williams, I think, Mr. Knight, were you next?
I just think, being that we don't service that area, and that should be something that the full board should be a discussion. I don't think should be even entertain that right now.
Okay.
Like to when that is as things change or whatever, but until then, everybody need to talk about that.
Okay. Well, that's a great segue into just a point of clarification. So our action today on this item will move this agenda item to the board, but it will not go to a consent agenda. It will be discussed by the full board. Is that correct?
That is correct. There's literally a policy that deals with the changing of policies, and it's one of the other ones I'm going to point out to you. Okay. And so what this board is doing is serving as a review committee to make recommendations or to defer and say that's a board decision. We don't have any position we're taking on that particular issue.
Yeah. If I may, I agree with Mr. Knight unless there's any objection. I think that deferring this specific discussion would be best because it is a pretty sensitive topic, so, on this one specific item.
So I would motion to move this to the full board.
Second.
Okay. We have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed, like sign. Okay, the motion carries.
Okay, the next,
and that was just for...
That was just one of 5 issues.
So we just moved on to one specific...
Yes, sir.
Yes.
On page 6.
That's been deferred to the board. Hopefully, when we're through with the balance of it, unless there's something else you wish to take out, you will move it to the board recommending approval.
Okay.
The next thing I wanted to point out to you is the issue on the very next page, 7, and it deals with occurrence of a vacancy. Some of you were not on the board at the time the governor did not act. The statute says that if the appointive body does not act to appoint a member within a specified time period, this board is to appoint a person to fill that role. It isn't optional. There was concern at the board level about filling a gubernatorial spot because the governor failed to act. Didn't want to get into a situation where we look to be arrogating to ourselves a gubernatorial prerogative, but the governor had not acted. The question was, what constitutes the occurrence of a vacancy? So what we've done now is we've established a clear process. If you look at the blue insert that I'm suggesting, the occurrence of a vacancy shall be deemed to happen upon the date of delivery of notice to the appointing member of the fact that a vacancy exists. Normal common sense would say a vacancy exists when no one's available to serve, but since there is in essence, sort of a right to appoint, it would be important to notify. Normally under due process, you have notice and opportunity to be heard. So what we're doing here is we will provide a notice, whether it's the county, the city, or the governor. They'll get a notice, and if they still don't respond, then you really have no option. There's nothing to debate. You have to appoint someone to fill in.
Mr. Smith, can I just point out just a scenario? So let's say that we had an unexpected vacancy where the state, for instance, didn't have notice of it, right? It was for whatever reason.
It happened. You remember the lady who had to leave due to health issues? Yeah. She literally had to vacate the board. Right. Usually you stay on until your replacement's appointed. So we had that vacancy, and the governor, I don't know what he knew or didn't know, but we didn't move in 20 days to replace her. We did send a notice. We ultimately got an appointment from the governor.
Right. So we still have that we're not obligated. We still have that opportunity to give them adequate time to respond.
Well, the statute requires you fill it within 20 days. Right. We want to make sure at least the governor or the county or whomever is on notice, right, because she had to depart quickly. I'm not sure whether she notified the governor. There's no process in our policy that says who notifies the governor. So it's kind of unfair to expect a governor to respond in a time period that he doesn't know has started.
Right, and we're talking, to clarify, we're talking about responding, not necessarily appointing someone or filling the vacancy, but at least responding with some type of intent.
Well, the statute, I will only tell you what the statute requires. Okay. Statute requires if there's no one appointed within the specified time period, this board is to act. Right. Now, if the board is slow in acting, then the board is slow in acting. That's always a prerogative the board has. But that's what the statutory obligation is.
That's what I wanted to clarify. We still have that prerogative on how we act.
Right.
Okay.
Will the notification take place at the time of the vacancy or 20 days after the vacancy?
The notice will take place immediately upon vacancy. The statute allows 20 days to appoint a replacement.
After the vacancy is known?
The statute refers to the term vacancy. What I'm trying to do is incorporate within that definition notice.
Thank you.
It's a lawyer thing. Want to make sure they have opportunity.
I feel that way.
Mr. McLean?
Just to be clear, what constitutes a vacancy?
Normally a vacancy would mean unavailable to serve. So for example, if the board meeting is scheduled in November, if the person a person who serves on that board is ill and notifies us they're no longer able to serve and they don't show up, it would seem the vacancy exists then. So in between a meeting, before someone fails to show up, I would suggest you could be flexible in that regard. It's when they fail to show up in a meeting they otherwise would participate in. So you got a little flexibility there anyway. Anywhere between 30 to 60 days, depending upon our meeting notices, our meeting cycle.
Okay.
Okay.
Are there any other questions or thoughts? So we would need David, a motion to move this as
well. Unless there's an objection to that, why don't I go through the other 3 or 4 things we have, and then hopefully you can approve the entire body, because a lot of this is very ministerial. Yeah. Okay. I just wanted to point out the things that are not quite ministerial, because I don't want you to read about it on paper and go.
I didn't want to. I thought you needed a motion on every item, so okay.
No, just the ones you're pulling out. I think it'd be the easiest way to do it. On the same page, if you look at the bottom, again, just to make sure you know, if there's a shortage of committee members, this allows the chair to appoint interim or replacement members so that you can have a quorum. It's just kind of a cleanup of the process. I don't think that's terribly controversial, but I wanted you to know that it was there. Didn't want you to think we're... The next issue is the travel policy that's on page 14. I am pointing that out to you simply because a lot of it's been deleted. That doesn't mean we don't have a policy. It's dealt with elsewhere, and it's also in the statute. So you're not failing to have a travel policy.
And just to confirm, we already have a policy. It's not like it has to be drafted.
You do have a policy, and under the statute, you're obligated to follow Chapter 112, which has policy as well. Okay, if you look at page 31, this is the procedure for amending the policies. These changes are intended only to clarify the process that you have used and that I therefore think you intend to use. So I believe this is language that clarifies that. And one of the things it does, there was 2 meetings in order to adopt. It was a preliminary meeting and a final meeting. This committee, for example, by virtue of this language, is clearly intended to be a review committee. I believe that's what the policy said initially, but it could have been clearer. So what I'm doing is I'm just making it clear. So when the board meets in November, they don't have to defer it to December because they have to have 2 meetings. This is one of the review committee meetings. That's the purpose of this meeting, and this just clarifies that. Okay, the next question.
Oh, okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Go ahead.
Oh, continue, Mr. Smith.
Okay, the next thing I wanted to point out to you is just the fact that we're changing the settlement amount that is permitted by our settlement committee.
Page, which page?
I'm sorry, your page 94 and 95, it's mentioned several times, and page 92. And what this says is anything in excess of 50,000 goes to the board. Previously it was 25,000. So in essence, you're allowing settlement authority between 25 and 50,000 to not have to go to the board. That's the change. I just wanted to point out you've doubled that amount. In case that's an issue of concern to you, that's what that change does.
Okay. Mr. McLean, you're recognized first.
Regardless of the amount coming to the full board, is the board made apprised of any settlements?
Yes.
Okay.
There's always a committee report by the litigation committee to the board.
Mr. White, did you have a comment?
When's the last time that number had previously been changed?
I can't remember, so it's not been in a long time.
It hasn't been since I've been here for 7 years.
Okay. All right.
So it might seem like a big change, but it sat there for a long time as well.
That makes sense.
If I may, I assume that there's some pragmatic purpose for changing that, or is there, or what's the is there a rationale behind?
Yeah, there is. Oftentimes litigation sometimes moves at a rate that it would be helpful to be able to be more flexible. And you do have a board member on the litigation committee. I also serve on it. The CEO also serves on it. So it's a committee that this board has appointed and controls anyway. Okay. And you're just giving them that authority. Okay. And they report everything to the board. Great. Last thing I wanted to point out to you was page 103, and this is because it's the largest in volume change to the procurement manual or in conjunction with it. And this is in part necessary because of the FTA requirement. So this is to make sure we're in compliance with one of our major grant providers. They want to make sure we have this kind of a policy, and this is pretty much tracking their requirements. I just pointed out for your information. And I believe the rest of the changes are mostly language, ministerial, change in HR to our, to the full title of the department, things of that nature. So with the exception of the item that you've pulled out for special review, if you're in favor of these changes, or if you have any questions, we can talk about that first, but if you're in favor of recommending the other changes to the board, I would suggest we have a motion to that effect in the vote.
May I ask for clarification? So if we've pulled the one item, and we move the rest to the board, which I definitely would like to do today, it would not be on a consent agenda. This would be discussed similarly as we're discussing it today, correct?
Yes, because even if it were on consent agenda, since you specifically pulled an item, we'd have to make sure we discuss that with the board.
Okay. Okay. Are there any other, just a quick question. Did anyone have any other comments or thoughts on any of the other language? I know we all had an opportunity to review this. Everyone's good? Okay. All right. Do I have a motion to approve? Or are there any other questions?
No, I'm ready to make the motion. I believe we need to act as the review committee that we are and pass these forward on to the board. That's my motion.
As recommended.
As recommended, yeah. With the one exception?
Yes,
Yeah.
with the one exception,
Yeah,
yes.
okay.
I second it.
All right. Okay, all those in favor respond by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed, like sign. Okay, the ayes carry. The motion passes.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
You're a man of few words.
And
I like it.
thank you, Mr. Smith, and thank you for staff. I know this is an important document, and we appreciate your diligence on the changes, so, and thank you all for your review. Thank you. All right. Next, we have agenda item B. I believe we are going to pull that from the agenda. Jeff, would you like to speak to that, or should I?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to pull item B from consideration from the committee, and we will bring that back to a future committee date to be determined.
Okay, we will do that. On to agenda item C. Hi, good morning, Ms. Sambal.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and Directors. For the record, Cindy Zambella, Director of Budget and Grants. Before you today is a resolution authorizing the interim chief executive officer to enter into a joint participation agreement between HART and the Florida Department of Transportation to accept the annual state block grant assistance for FY19 in the amount of $5,029,449. The state block grant is our annual formula grant. It's based on the information that we provide to NTD every year, as well as the information in our TDP. And this helps to defray the costs of operating expenses, primarily operator salaries. So with that, staff would recommend that you review that item and advance it to the full board.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Sambella. Are there any questions or any discussion on the agenda item? Have a motion to approve?
Motion to approve.
Second.
Second. Okay, all those in favor respond by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. Okay, the motion carries. Thank you, Ms. Sambella. Yeah, thank you all for approving us accepting money, as always. All right, agenda item D, Ms. Sambella.
And me again, as interim director of procurement, before you today is a resolution authorizing the HART Board of Directors to delegate contracting officer authority to Darlene Lally in the procurement department. Ms. Lally serves as a contract specialist too, and at times may need the signatory authority up to $50,000. HART's procurement manual establishes in section 2-100 that the board of directors confer by resolution general authorizations to the named employees to execute purchases and enter into contracts on behalf of the authority. So it's staff recommendation that again you review this item and advance it to the full board.
Do we have any discussion?
Question?
Mr. McLean, you recognize?
Cindy, how many folks do we have with that authority?
Currently we have 3 that have a $50,000 threshold, and I have a $150,000 threshold. I believe that might be in your action item as well, but there's a table.
Yeah,
Oh, I'm sorry.
that's okay. There's a table on page 212 of the agenda in the attachments. Thank you for the background. Appreciate it. Okay, are there any other questions?
So that's
Or do you
gonna,
have- oh, Mr. Knight?
yeah, that's gonna work in hand with the 50,000 increase, right?
Well, I think there might be a coincidence there. He was asking about the $50,000 settlement increase.
Oh, it has no correlation.
Yeah.
No. These
Because-
are just procurement contracts, not settlements.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Is that?
Oh,
I have a
Ms.
question.
Williams, you're recognized.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Is that $50,000 per person per incident? So is there a baseline, I guess, a cap at the number that could be potentially approved?
No, it's based on the contracts that would come before the organization for purchases that would reach that threshold.
Okay. So just to clarify, no cap, we could continue to have 3, then another 4, 6, or is that how that works? Or I'm just asking
Staffing or how many contracts?
the number of contracts that are allowed to be approved based on this recommendation.
Right, this is a per contract recommendation. It's irrespective of the number of contracts that would come before them.
Okay.
It's contingent on how many contracts we would need as an organization to procure goods and services.
It cannot cover a second and third contract with the same provider for the same goods. That's limited. So they can't pile on and get to 150 or 200 by approving separate contracts.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ms. Holmes. Any other questions or comments? Okay, thank you, Ms. Sembello. Do I have a motion to approve?
I move to approve.
Okay, second? Okay. We have a motion and a second. All those in favor respond by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign? Okay, the motion carries. Thank you, Ms. Sembello. Agenda item E. Good morning, Ms. Crescentini.
Good morning, I'm Crescentini, Director of Project Management. I'm here to request that you authorize the interim chief executive officer to award a contract to Clever for program management services in support of the regional interjurisdictional mobility project, aka Flamingo Fairs, for a not to exceed amount of $355,962, and also to advance this item to the full HART Board of Directors for the November 15th.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions or discussion on the agenda item? Okay, do we have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
Second. We have a motion and a second. All those in favor respond by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign? Okay, the motion carries. Thank you, Ms. Crescentini. Appreciate it. All right, on to, we are moving through, and it's not even 10 o'clock yet. Agenda item F. Mr. Bracken, good morning.
Good morning. Good morning, Greg Bracken, Director of Operations Support, ED Officer. Before you, I have the request for authorization to conduct a public hearing to submit the grant applications and supporting documents to the Florida Department of Transportation, funding under the 5310 grant, operating funds for the HART Plus Taxi Chaos program, and capital funds to purchase the transit vehicles. It's a process that we have to go through and have a public hearing before we can actually submit the grant application. We will have the public hearing. Our ADA committee is scheduled for in November, so this will fall right into line. If the board does approve it in the 1st of November, we'll go right to our ADA committee in November, and then the application is due to for Department of Transportation in January. So everything should fall in line. This year's grant funding was $200,000 for the voucher program, and we had $288,000 that they provided us for purchase of new vehicles. So this is the ask this year, $400,000 and for the vehicles and $500,000 for the voucher program.
Okay, Mr. McLean?
So we're asking for a grant of a total of $900,000?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
It's always an ask, and then you get what funding is left over. I think
How many
no, good.
Go ahead, Mr. Knight. You're recognized.
How many vehicles?
that'll be 5.
5.
Yeah, those will be our paratransit vehicles with the lifts and all the good features that we are currently, and those are all purchased under our state contract, under the TRIPS program.
Okay. Mr. McLean?
My only recommendation, if we do a motion going forward, is to have those numbers in there. The amounts you're seeking, if it's not already in there.
It's in the action item in the letter itself.
Yeah, if we can embed them within that. Correct, yeah, sort of like we do with all the other documents here, just throw that out there real fast, that'd be good.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Any other questions or comments, discussion? Okay.
I do have a comment.
Yes.
I think this is typical of this time of year. You know, we've gone through the process of approving the budget, and now it's time to start giving people approval to actually start spending, applying, all the other adverbs that go along with that. So this looks like a lot of rapid spending, but it's just living up to what we just approved with our budget. So I think we should all be kind of relaxed on this. It's not like we're having a spending spree. Right. We're just fulfilling what we just said we would do. So
yeah, thank you for that perspective.
Welcome.
Absolutely.
With that in mind, I'll motion to approve with those recommended changes to the language right up front.
We have a second?
Second.
Okay. We have a motion and a second. All those in favor respond by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign? Okay. The ayes carry. The motion passes. Just a quick comment before we go on to the interim chief's executive officer's report. I just wanted to comment that, I'm very grateful. I think, everyone, I don't know, I just think that this committee, I want to emphasize, I guess, the importance of it. I think it's been demonstrated here today and even recognized, and I'm very appreciative of everyone's, of this committee and our role relative to the board. So thank you all for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. All right. Mr. Seward.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As many of you know, last week we started our new streetcar service. It was actually on the 7th of October we began with free fares and our extended service. Friday, we had a fantastic event in downtown Tampa. We got a lot of good press coverage. We'll be sharing more pictures and information about that event at the board meeting, but I specifically wanted to thank Director McLean and Ms. Williams for being there on Friday. It was a fun event.
It's okay.
It was a good time. And numbers that I'm already seeing just from the first week of service, unaudited ridership numbers are surpassing almost 100% higher than what we saw the week before. And that isn't just the weekends, that's a weekday as well. So we're seeing what we had hoped to see just in the first week. The only other item I have, yesterday, today, tomorrow, and Wednesday, is the Florida Public Transportation Association's annual meeting. We have some staff members that are currently there. I will be leaving this afternoon, or right after this meeting, to head to Daytona Beach for tonight's events, where our HART board member, Jimmy Suarez, he's going to be recognized as the FPTA Bus Operator of the Year runner-up. So it's a great recognition for our organization and our staff, and I and a couple other staff members will be there. He and his wife will be there to receive the award tonight in Daytona Beach. And then some early morning activity, or maybe last night, I'm not sure which, but I got the email this morning. We did win, and it's timely based on the conversation that we had this morning concerning perception of the public. We won some marketing awards from FPTA. We won first place for our Hurricane Irma case study that we did. And we won second place for the work that our marketing staff did on 275 LX deployment. So we're really, as it says, yay. So we're very excited for that recognition, and I will provide, we'll get some pictures, social media put up of tonight's event, and that's all I have.
Thank you very much. Great. Unless anyone has anything else, I think I already pretty much gave my report. I'm very grateful for you all, and look forward to seeing you on November 5th. Mr. McLean?
Before we depart, I just want to congratulate Jeff and the staff for the Friday's event. That came off really, really well. It looked very positive. We had a beautiful day. Mayor Dick Greco was there, and he was entertaining as always. And he loved it. I mean, he just loved it that we were doing that right down there in a park named after him. But I do want to commend the staff. They did a very, very nice job. That came off good. We had a lot of what I would call dignitaries down there from the local area, and just herding all those cats and dogs and getting us started in a reasonably on time, within, I guess we'll use, airplane speak when we say on time, within 10, 15 minutes. It just turned out very, very nice. So thank you very much, Jeff. I would encourage you, in talking with the Secretary for FDOT for our region here and all that, I would encourage you to kind of promote that. The trolley, as you know, is kind of part of our fabric, if you will, almost as much as Ybor, the city itself is. It's been around for quite a long time, and at one time, I mean, it had 53 miles of track. I think I was somewhere near there. It used to have well over 1 million riders, and so it's just a phenomenal thing, and it's part of our fabric now. We're going to try to, as best, to promote that and push it. So if you haven't ridden it, take a ride, and then bring some folks with you, because in talking to the Secretary, the more we can get that used, the better it's going to look, and then, of course, that kind of drives funding. So if we can just promote that well and hard, I myself will be riding that a little bit more often, and then we can use it for various things. So so good job on your staff, Jeff, and I'll just close on that note. Thank you.
Very nice. Oh, Ms. Williams.
For the sake of short response, I echo all of your sentiments, and thank you, Jeff, to you and your team.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you. That's excellent.
I was out of town, sorry I missed the opportunity to be a part. Had I been in town, I would have. But I also really appreciate, some of the workers for Heartline. They didn't know who I was. One time on 22nd in Hillsborough by Walgreens, somebody broke a glass or whatever. So I just got out vehicle and just went by there. They didn't know who I were or whatever. I just asked them what happened. They was very, not only respectful, but very sharing information and everything. They got the job done. And then afterwards, then I introduced myself and everything, and it was appreciated. It was all working together. When I get on the bus or and talk to some of the ones on things going on, very appreciative and enjoy what they're doing. And I just see great things happening, and the culture changing, and as we continue, and then also with our entering, bringing up things, like I said, with Ms. Lee and other parts of the staff that willing to listen and willing to, work behind to get some things done, and I really appreciate it and hope we can continue.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, thank you. Well, thank you, Mr. Knight, for your comments, and everyone else as well. And I echo the sentiments. Thanks to staff for everything. And I think, we're obviously in a season now where there's going to be some big decisions by a lot of people, right? November 6th. And I think that what was just echoed just now is something that, rises above funding and and how incredible is it that we can boast of that, just the people that we have. And so regardless of how things work out, I think, it's just good to know that we have this tone here. So thank you all. And with that, we're adjourned. Thank you. Enjoy the cool weather, hopefully.